Welcome to the Month End, a CPG community chat. The Month End will provide emerging CPG brands real-life knowledge into the accounting, finance, and operational worlds. Our guests will be key stakeholders from those same brands as well as other key contributors to the industry. Welcome to episode 26 of the Month End podcast. Today's guest is Jeff Wiguna from Kuju Coffe. How you doing, Jeff?
Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to chat about Kuju and your journey the last several years within the brand. So kind of before we get started, just give me a little background on yourself, where you're at, why did you get into CPG and why did you launch Kuju?
Yeah, I'll start. I've got two daughters. I'll say that first before the company. That's always the kind of a top of mind thing. And I started the company with my brother before the first one was born. And it was a Kickstarter, I think, back in 2015. So the brand story is Kuju was founded by two Eagle Scout brothers who got tired of instant coffee while camping. And the Kickstarter in 2015, mind you, at that time, outdoor was not a thing. And I remember a lot of people thought this was the most specific niche kind of idea you could ever come up with. And at the time, REI was only carrying Starbucks Via. But we did it, and we were just inspired by the idea of bridging a passion for the outdoors with the quality experiences of a great cup of coffee. That was really compelling to us. And you fast forward, a couple of years, we debuted at Outdoor Retailer, which is the Outdoor Industries Expo West, August of 2016, and shortly after that, literally the day after that, we got a vendor packet to go national into Sportsman's Warehouse, which is a great hunting retail chain with about, at the time, 75 doors. And a couple months later, we had a meeting with REI, and we went into REI stores, I think May of the following year. And from there, I guess you could say it all worked out from a distribution standpoint. Today, we're in roughly 2,000 doors, national Whole Foods and Sprouts and REI, Academy Sports, and all those places. But it's been quite the journey, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners can imagine. But it all started with a passion for being outside with a really good cup of coffee and kind of the transformative impact that could have on your psyche, even if it's just for 5 minutes.
I get it, man. I'm a coffee lover. I got 3 kids, and if I can get up 10 minutes before them and enjoy a cup of Joe before all hell breaks loose, better. So good. That's great background. I'm looking forward to kind of chatting. So, in terms of, I guess, how long have you been in business?
This is probably our 6th year, depending on how you cut it. 6th full year of operation. Yeah.
So then, I guess from a 6-year standpoint, number one, congrats on that. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, that's all kind of good things to kind of celebrate. But how many different phases of the business have you had?
That's an awesome question, actually. I would say, the last 2.5 years was COVID. So that was 2020 was a phase, 21 was a phase, now 2022 is a phase. I think prior to that, I'd probably say 2 or 3 phases. I think there was a Kickstarter to launch in first retailers. Then there was figuring out how to make sure we don't run out of inventory, just make stuff. And then I think the 3rd phase was probably, okay, we can make a lot of stuff. Let's start just continuing to sell like hell and market. And that's probably phase 3. And then phase 4 has been from 2020 on, but that's simultaneously been grappling with scale. Like, we went national in Sprouts in February 2020. We went national in Whole Foods at the end of 2021. So there's been a lot of organizational learning, leadership learning on my end the last 2 to 3 years to set us up for the next 5-6 years, really. So I'd say maybe 4 or 5 stages.
Awesome. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's always interesting to kind of reflect and look back on your business, like in terms of, I guess, the segmentation of different periods.
Yeah.
Going to kind of first, the number one Kickstarter, like how did that go? What did you learn? Like, how do you take money in, and then how do you earmark money for inventory and selling?
Yeah, we did the Kickstarter at a time when Kickstarters were very popular, and a lot of Kickstarters were not fulfilling on time. And so I was personally very sensitive about making sure we could get it done on time. And I think that's kind of an integrity value that just pervades into the way we do business now. But most of the work was in the planning. Like what were the items? How much is that going to cost? How much do we need? So we didn't raise a ton. We only raised $16,000. We used it to fund the trip to a trade show to check it out, buy some preliminary equipment. But the real reason we did it was just to test our chops, quite honestly, just to see if we could even get it done. We didn't have any product. We had a prototype, but it was mostly a marketing and planning and supply chain exercise. So we fulfilled it on time. We had a little bit of extra money to use for other things. And it felt like a big challenge at the time. I was so tired after it that I said, hey, I don't know if I want to keep doing this after a Kickstarter. But we kept on going. And in retrospect, the Kickstarter looks like a nice little project now compared to the problem to deal with today. So that's kind of what that was like.
Awesome. So then the next kind of step of national distribution, kind of at a young phase of your business, how did that go?
Well, the way it went on a production standpoint was generally fine, because I think production is a little bit more predictable than maybe sales forecasting or buyer behavior predicting. So to put it really bluntly, we just worked our ass off to make sure to fulfill the national sportsman's warehouse order. We were still manufacturing in our living room. And for REI, we were not manufacturing in our living room, but in an actual kind of office space, but still packing by hand. And we just put a lot of time into it, had part-time workers doing it, and we shipped it out. I think it wasn't until we got real good production line operations set up that the national stuff on Sprouts and Whole Foods started kicking in and getting involved with distributors and chargebacks and all that stuff. When you're that management has to be, I don't know if it has to be tight knit, because I think it's pretty hard to keep it so tight knit, given what it's like to work with these people. But I think we had to be really good with understanding the risk mitigation and risk profiles of distribution and production across the board. And that's something that we're kind of constantly in now, especially with the COVID things on pricing, inflation, and supply chain and so forth.
Yeah, well, let's get into that. Like, how is your supply? I guess number one, how is your product mix changed from like selling to the customer since inception? And then number two, what else has changed within that, specific the last couple of years of COVID, supply chain, freight costs, et cetera? So number one, start with like the product mix. Do you have the same product mix? Do you have a different product mix?
We've been extremely focused. One of the things I was told when we first launched at our first Expo West, which was March 2017, was just to be known for one thing. And for that, I've always kept this in kind of the back of my head, just to be known as camp coffee or outdoor coffee. And I think that's translated into a product mix that is almost basically the same as day one today. We started with kind of our core set of 3 roasts. We launched our single origin line, which is the 3 additional roasts the year after, and we have not really played around with it since. We've had different packs, like gift packs, and we went national world market and paper source, but we've divested from that since. And at the grocery level, we're just focusing on 3 core SKUs, which have been the core things from the very beginning. So not a lot of change there. Yeah.
Good. And then I guess from, moving on to the next question in terms of what has changed the last couple of years since COVID related to costs or supply chain or just managing the business, buying inventory sooner versus later, or kind of how operationally supply chain aspect, like what's changed, what's stayed the same?
Yeah.
How have you responded?
I think, well, one, we were not expecting to go national in Whole Foods. When we did that review, I actually had only pitched for maximum half of the regions. And at the time we were only in one region in NorCal, and it wasn't even the whole region. It was like 26 stores in NorCal out of like 40, 50. So I was sitting outside and I got this email from Whole Foods and I counted the DCs and the doors and the list, it goes horizontally. And I was like, holy cow, this, like, wait, there's another column and another column. And having been experienced enough at the time, this was probably our 4th, 5th year, I wasn't ecstatic, nor was I scared. I was very level and realized this was going to be kind of a big thing. On On a supply chain basis, I think we have a very strong supply chain and good relationships there. So it's definitely challenging, but not as much a source of risk uh, source. But the launch with Whole Foods themselves were awesome, but I think there were definitely some, kind of touched on it before, some challenges with Unify on the amount of orders, and in particular, in this case, we had not gotten paid for multiple months actually from Unify, even though we had done a national Whole Foods launch. And upon pursuit of this and investigation, we found out that our POs were actually deleted from their system.
On
And
accident.
I hope so. I hope it was an accident. So I kind of paused because you see a lot of stuff when you're building a company from scratch, especially pioneering a category. But I never thought during one of the most critical launches that POs would get deleted. So if we didn't pursue it, we likely would have never gotten paid. So this was months and months over time of just working on this, investigating with our shipping partners where things are, escalating where we needed to. And I don't know, I'm happy to go into it, but it's just it affects so many components of the business that it was a good rite of passage, I think, to understand. You learn different kinds of things when something like that happens.
So let's get into that. This
Sure.
is a podcast targeted towards the CPG brand owner. Some of them may not know like even the logistics of Unify or distribution or whatever. So I guess step one, kind of, can you just explain the structure and how Unify or KE and how that works from just a front standpoint in the process, and then we can kind of go through the phases of what happened and how you reacted. And at the end, what did you learn? So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, well, at a basic level, for anyone who might be more new to CPG, when you sell in particular to Whole Foods or a Sprouts, they have a distributor. So Unify is the key distributor that Whole Foods works with, and KE is the key distributor Sprouts works with. And there are a lot of these DCs, 10 to 15. I don't know if it reaches 20 around the country, but you're essentially selling to the distributor. And then obviously at this point, the distributor is selling to the chain, to Whole Foods. So we have a great relationship with both chains, but it's incredibly critical to maintain your distribution forecasting and cash flow monitoring with the distributors, because that's what's paying your bills. Not it. I mean, the chain is giving you the chance, but your cash flow comes from the distributors. So to say that Unify is the one that by mistake deleted our POs is actually basically saying we had spent a lot of money on production, and over 6 to 9 months we were not getting anything back. And to say the least, that was very challenging. But it affects your priorities as a company, because you want to be focused on the marketing at that point. But if you're dealing with cash flow challenges of that magnitude, you have to have ridiculously keen understanding of the levers of your business, so you know where to move things at certain times. And so luckily we got through it, but it was very difficult. You should probably ask me a specific question, because my mind, usually I can articulate very clearly, but this was such a unique situation. There are a lot of different components to this. Yeah.
So number one, just specific to this, like, is there anything that you could have done or somebody else, a different, CPG brand could have done to minimize that risk of the PO getting deleted before you ship the product or before you produce the product?
Yeah, I think it's the basic watch your AR timelines very meticulously. And the day that somebody is maybe 1 day late, don't be afraid to just say, hey, we wanted to see if this is coming in. I think Unified is not necessarily the best at responding. So second to that, kind of matrixing urgency or importance of the AR that you're following. And if you're not getting a response, understand if it's like a $400 order, it's okay. But if it's a $400,000 order, it's probably not okay. So I think we presumed that payments would come in, because they have in the past when we were working with other DCs. So we just assumed it would just take some time. That was probably not the best assumption. I think if we were more proactive about communication, we might have been able to
Gotcha.
get ahead of it.
Gotcha. Good. And for the listeners out there, what do you mean by AR as accounts receivable? So you enter an invoice on your end, a PO on their end is they're purchasing product from you. You invoice them, which is revenue and accounts receivable, and then basically maintaining and reviewing your accounts receivable and open invoices. Just from an accounting standpoint, I urge all just businesses, small business owners, make sure you invoice on time and make sure you review your AR at least weekly. And then feel free to follow up with people when you're past due. I know sometimes you're like, well, they're going to pay me. I feel bad for following up. No, it's a contract. They owe you based upon terms. It doesn't always happen that way, but there's nothing wrong with you bugging them, whether you do it, your bookkeeper does it, or whatever. So
Yeah, what we do now is we did go over AR weekly, but what we do now is go very specifically into AR, in particular larger POs, just to know, because you might run into something where the distribution center, even if it's not unified, somebody else might just have labor problems, so they're processing inventory slower, affects accounting. You just want to know all that stuff, and so it's essentially for an early CPG brand, I think it all rolls up into just cash flow management competencies, which I should say is very different from managing your P&L. And that's an important distinction. I think, on a P&L basis, things can look fabulous, and you won't feel that way on the cash flow if you don't pay attention to the cash either.
Definitely. That was actually my second question on this topic. Like, how did you manage cash like throughout that process, and how did you figure out just to fumble and get through those several months, periods of not getting paid while having to already pay for your inventory and running the normal operations of your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing I think that's really unique about us is even though we sell coffee and it's a consumable, we're actually at heart an outdoor company, and we have a lot of outdoor industry distribution. And the really good thing about that channel is it doesn't have a lot of the complexities that maybe the grocery side has across the board: margin, distributors, overhead. So we have a diversified set of business where that was helping us quite a bit move forward. The second component of that is just watching cash on a weekly basis and just asking the question, well, what do we need to make it through the next couple of weeks? And I mean, this is maybe not super helpful, but figuring it out. So what I mean by figuring it out we did have a line of credit with a bank vendor or a finance vendor, whatever you call it. And we did some small additional raises on a convertible note that we had out with friends and family, which helped as well. And on top of that, I think you just want to be really resourceful with where you're putting the money. And sometimes you have to stop spending money where it's not returning at the time. But if you stop spending money, you need to know the levers of your business well enough that you understand the impact clearly. So I think, just understanding your business alone is very powerful. I think that's probably an understated thing. Understand what makes it tick,
Yeah. No, I think, I think figuring it out is a great term. It's very vague, but when you understand your business, understand the mechanics of P&L, cash flow, revenue, what do I need to spend this month to keep my business operable without taking a step back and understanding all the solutions out there, and really, once you understand all that really helps out in terms of these downturns, because that's when you can be like, look at it and be like, okay, I need $22,000 the next 2 weeks versus like, I need money. And people come and say, well, how much do you need? You're like, I don't know. No, it's like, if you're very precise and you know what's going on, then that's kind of, it's an easier problem to solve for. And I think that's kind of what you're getting to with what you're saying.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Good. So the last thing, looking back, is there anything that you change or anything, within that process of you wish you did or you didn't do?
Do you mean just kind of broadly speaking over the course of just having grown the business, or just?
No, just specifically that example of the unified situation. Like once you got paid for those delayed POs, when you look back, you're like, gosh, I wish I would have done that in month one, or you think you handled it as best as you can and you got through it?
No, I think we handled it in general quite well. We handled it and we moved forward. I think it was a big thing, but it's not as big as your overarching momentum and strategy for the organization as a whole. And I would say it's not as big as just understanding the nature of the equity you want to build with your stakeholders and vendors overall. I think our ability to get through it was and continues to be a testament, I think, to the strength of the relationships that we've built within our company's ecosystem. And so maybe the one thing I would say to anyone listening is product has to be good, operations has to be good, but all your power and equity and ultimately long-term growth and profits from a company usually happens long term. So you need to ask this question of, are you building relationships that are investing into long-term equity and narratives, not transactional? And I have found we were only able to handle that because the equity that we have with the relationships in the company on both sides with our buyers and our supply chain are uniquely very strong. I don't think we could have handled it if that was not the case.
Relationships, the key to life. So now kind of moving forward, just kind of getting a more financial kind of standpoint, like what KPIs from a financial standpoint do you look at now to run your business or to see the health of your business, as well as how does that differ from how you used to look at it, or does it differ? So I guess let's start out number one, like what are you looking at on a month over month basis from a more pure financial standpoint?
That's a great question. I think on a finance basis, I'm constantly paying attention these days to cost trends, logistics and fulfillment being a key one, and also understanding our pricing strategy. Because obviously, I think the biggest impact you can make on your bottom line tends to be within your COGS or cost of sales. Actually, I think your marketing and everything can get managed, but if you want, if you can save 1 to 2% on your COGS, that translates pretty heavily, I think, if you're doing volume. So I think about that trajectory. The other thing I look at is actually the question of how do we look at our finances? Not even so much what KPIs we look at, because you want to make sure the way you think about your financial KPIs is reflective of the unique value proposition and structure of your organization. I actually think that's relatively challenging, because if you're looking at it in a very standard way, you're going to inevitably derive the types of KPIs that might be standard, which usually results in more standard behavior and more standard operating and value propositions into the marketplace. So I think being able to understand the uniqueness of your organization and product and have that pull through every component of the company, I think is really valuable. But that's a little bit, I think that's a little bit more of an advanced thing. So I understand our P&L and everything at an intuitive level at this point. But that's how I think about it right now.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Makes a lot of sense. All right, Jeff, can you give me a kind of a breakdown of where you're selling your product today?
Yeah, the way we think about distribution is really around where does our customer, which is the outdoor enthusiast, shop. So we're really focused on Whole Foods and Sprouts and REI, but we're also in a lot of other outdoor stores like Academy Sports in the South. Shields is a new retail partner. They're in the Midwest. Cabela's, Bass Pro, a lot of those types of, I don't know if those are types of places, but those are a lot of the majority of places that we're pushing business right now.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great chat. Like, it's always great getting specifically into a situation, and just as a an accounting firm who targets CPG brands, and I deal with all the sales calls. A lot of times when I'm talking to the folks, deduction management, unified KHE nightmares gets brought up. So it's very industry specific.
Yeah,
which is interesting, but it is something just to kind of get ahead of the curve, understanding what you signed up for, managing cash as best as you can, and then moving on. So I'm very appreciative of the example and the situation that you discussed, and I think it'll be a great value add to the listeners out there. So,
no, my pleasure to share. Thanks for having me.
All right, before we get out of here, a couple of things. We have our typical kind of 2 questions that we ask all of our guests. Number one, what does one CPG industry do?
Wait, sorry, say it again. What does the CPG industry do?
Yeah. So for any fellow brand owners, what would be one piece of advice to do?
Not what does the industry do. One piece of advice to do. I'd say stand for one thing. there's a lot of stuff out there, but you can only stand for one thing. And I would even say that is for the lifetime of the company, one thing. And if you can own that thing, then you'll accompany equity with your brand. Even if the revenue is low, brand equity and owning that one thing will eventually turn into sales. It's just the way it works.
Yeah, I remember back 10, 15 years ago when I was getting into the business world, entrepreneur world, I was trying to do like 5 things and it's like all of them sucked. So it's like focus on one and then, it's like really focus on it, and it really does help you grow that brand, grow that equity, the way you're looking at. So then the second question is then one CPG industry don't, for the folks out there.
I would say don't get distracted by all the press releases on LinkedIn.
Give us a little more background on that.
Yeah, sure. The CPG industry has a very low barrier to entry. So anyone can create food, go to the farmer's market and say, hey, I'm in CPG. But I think it has a very high barrier to entry to profit driving enterprise and networked capability. And a lot of the companies in the space tend to be venture capital backed. And the incentives that a company that is VC backed has in the way they grow, market, leverage PR is not always necessarily indicative of the best ways to build a long-standing profitable business. And so when I say ignore the press releases on LinkedIn, it's really about, if you understand your business supremely well and understand the customers who are buying from your business and serving them, I just genuinely don't think any press release matters at that point. You can have a competitor land on the front page of the Times, but I think you ask anyone who's had press, it's like a party. Like, it was great that night, and then the next day the sales didn't really uptick, but people thought it was cooler. That's what press is like to me. So don't get distracted by what you see. Get focused on serving your customers and maintaining your margin. It's not sexy, but that's how you'll make money, and that's how you'll serve more people over time.
Love it. That's a very unique don't, but I couldn't agree more on it. Those kind of short-term, like daily or here and there, like win moments. People know about Kuju or Accountfully. I'm out in the world. The next day it's back to work. And
I think I could say it because most of my CPG peers are VC backed. We're not VC backed. So if I had VCs on my board or something, I would obviously not be saying that because it doesn't make sense. But I think we tackle growth on a very unique basis. So I kind of I feel like I have a little bit more flexibility in kind of saying these things.
Awesome. Well, this was a great chat. Jeff, before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can find Kuju. What do you got brewing, with Kuju? Any new products? Just give us your little 30-second elevator pitch on Kuju here.
I'd say, we make pour over coffee really easy, and just buy us at REI, Whole Foods, Sprouts, and if you like it, share us on Instagram. We'll take a look. We've got some new stuff coming out. I'm not going to comment on that just yet, but just keep on buying us, follow us on Instagram, and you'll see. And I trust we'll make you happy.
Awesome. KujuCoffee.com, KUJU, out there. So again, thanks, Jeff. Hope everybody enjoyed the conversation here. Really good example of a bad situation with Unify go wrong, but turn into a positive long-term. Jeff, really enjoyed it. Episode 26 of the month then. Jeff Wiguna from Kuju Coffee. Take care, Jeff.
Thank you, Brad. See ya.